I have a confession to make. I watch TikTok quite often, actually. I started getting into it when my kids started getting on it, and I wanted to see what it was all about to make sure it was safe, and then I got addicted. But I'm glad I did in a way, because over the last couple of months, there has been this viral sort of iconic TikTok I guess, TikToker or subject matter of a TikToker. Neil the Seal has been going viral over the last few months. He's an elephant seal that lives in Tasmania, or that has been hauling out in Tasmania for a little bit for the last couple of months while he molts. And there are some really interesting videos of him. There's some videos of him, scratching himself on some pylons. There's some videos of him blocking people in their driveways, or blocking people on the road, or blocking people from coming out of their homes. He's just quite the character, and people are loving it. And I think it's a really good idea to have video of this wonderful animal with such a great character, so that we can start talking about elephant seal conservation and how we can better learn about elephant seals. So that's what we're going to do today. We have Sophia Volsky, who is on the podcast today. She studies elephant seals. She is very familiar with Neil the seal, and she is going to the University of Tasmania to do her PhD on elephant seal population dynamics. We're going to talk to her about Neil the seal, as well as her research, on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Neil the seal. And in particular, we're going to be talking to Sophia Volsky, who is a PhD student at the University of Tasmania studying population dynamics of elephant seals. And she has been the person who has been talking to the media about Neil the seal, because she's an elephant seal researcher, and she knows Neil the seal. She's very familiar with him. He has been going to this small town in Tasmania for the last 3 years, hanging out. We're going to find out why he goes back to this area, what he's doing in the area, and how the people are interacting with him by still keeping safe, and how their values kind of help him out in terms of, not touching him, not being in his way, and so forth. It's a really, really interesting story. It's a subject of viral TikToks going back a number of months, and hopefully, he's gone now from Tasmania. He's out at sea, probably, finding someone to breed with, or, looking after, trying to get some food and so forth. He's done molting for the year. He'll be back hopefully in November. You never know where he might end up. As he's getting older, he's 3 years old. As he gets older and bigger, maybe he'll be on a beach somewhere trying to find a mate. But we're going to find out what's happened over this past couple of months and this past year, and how Neil the seal became Neil the seal. We're also going to find out from Sophia about how she got into marine biology. I think it's a really interesting story, starting from Berlin, taking a trip to Australia, finding her passion, going back to Berlin, then going right back to Australia. It's an interesting story. You got to hear how she does it all. Not an easy way, but it is definitely one that I respect. So here is the interview with Sophia Volsky talking about Neil the seal and elephant seal conservation. Enjoy the interview, and we will talk to you after. Hey, Sophia, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about elephant seals?
I am so ready. Hi, Andrew.
Oh, wonderful. This is going to be awesome. I've been waiting for this interview for a long time. I've been searching for somebody to talk about Neil the seal. Because let's be honest, it's Neil's world and we're all just living in it, right? Like, this is something that has really taken over TikTok in one of its viral moments. We've been watching this elephant seal kind of find its home and interact with people quite a bit, and pylons and houses apparently, and scratching all over the place, and just kind of interacting with some of the people there from a distance, of course. And so it drummed up a lot of questions for a lot of people in terms of, why is he there? Is he safe? Is he healthy? When is he going back into the ocean? And sort of what's going to happen. I mean, he's a pretty young elephant seal. And so, it's going to be a lot of questions around that, but also just in conservation general of elephant seals around Tasmania. So I think there's a lot of questions, a lot of things to get into. So I can't wait to do that. Before we do that, Sophia, though, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
Can do. Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sophia Volsky. I am originally from Berlin, Germany. That's where I grew up and went to school. My family is still there. I moved to Australia in 2010. Initially came on a working holiday visa and decided that I really loved the country. I would like to study in Australia. I wasn't able to initially, so I started working full time until I was able to study and become a local resident. So I was working full time in hospitality, saving up money to be able to afford university, which I started then 5 years later. It's been a long journey studying in Brisbane, Australia, some tropical coral reef stuff, and then moving to Tasmania to study more Southern Ocean based Antarctica, subantarctic islands, and sort of temperate species, including the southern elephant seal. So I moved to Hobart
That
in 2018 and did my marine Antarctic studies there and started a PhD in 2021 on southern elephant seal population dynamics. The population I study is at Macquarie Island, which is a subantarctic island associated with Australia. It's about halfway between Tasmania and the Antarctic continent.
amazing. There's so much I want to unpack in
Yeah,
that.
please.
Starting from the beginning. So you went to high school, and I don't know what the high school system is like in Europe or in Berlin or Germany. You went to high school, decided, hey, I want to travel for a little bit, like a bit of a gap year, and then you decided to pick Australia. Why did you pick Australia?
Well, it's far away. I was
Yeah.
always keen to travel somewhere that spoke English, to be honest. That was something
Okay.
I really loved speaking English as a kid. It was a passion of mine. I do have family in the US in Seattle as well. So
Oh,
I always
cool.
had that kind of that bilingual aspect to me growing up. So I was really keen to speak English, but the UK, I mean to the US I'd been before. The UK was a little bit too
Hmm.
close to Germany. So Australia was it,
Right.
and I wanted to scuba dive. So,
Nice.
yeah, both of those things had
Okay,
me.
well, hey, yeah, those they both have that great
Yeah,
scuba diving and a lot of English. Now, is that speaking English in Germany? I ask this as more personally too because my daughter has a friend who's doing almost like an exchange in here in Canada from Germany, and her English is pretty good. And is English sort of taught fairly well or consistently throughout school in Germany?
yeah. So, in general, I have to say the German public school system is really good at educating students to begin with. And then we
Oh,
learn
good.
English from grade 3 onwards. So, very
Oh,
early
okay.
on. And then there's a second language introduced around grade 5. So, before you even start high school, you have two languages that you're learning.
That's amazing because I mean it's so applicable too if you want to travel, and I think that's wonderful. So here you are in Australia, and just more. It was traveling around. Were you planning on staying the year? Was that the idea? Because I know visas with Australia, even from Canada, are difficult to get for a travel visa. Is it about a year, and then you were just I'm gonna learn to
Yeah.
scuba dive. I'm gonna travel around and enjoy the country.
Yeah, my return flight was actually booked for 6 months, and I took it. I
Okay.
took it home and booked a one-way ticket back and kind of moved out to my bedroom. Yeah, that was a big conversation to have with my family. Yep.
I could imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Had a falling out with some of them, but that's since been resolved. So
Oh,
yes,
good.
it's hard. It's
Yeah.
tough because it's so far.
Yeah, and how old were you when that happened? When you decided to happen? Were you 18, 19?
Yes, I was 19. Yeah.
So as a parent of myself of a 16-year-old, I'm like, that's young. I'm not sure if I'm ready, like as a parent, for that to happen with my daughters. So I can just imagine that must have been hard for your parents and yourself to be so far away, from Australia. Did you have? I guess you had made friends when you were down there, right?
Yeah, I had friends with me to begin with, and then I also the Australian
Okay,
culture is very open, very inviting,
right.
when you meet strangers. And when I initially also found a job, so then made friends there. it was pretty easy to build a
Gotcha.
little community. Yeah.
But now, when you went back after that 6 months and you decided, okay, one way ticket, here we go. Was that at the time were you thinking, okay, school is on my mind. I want to go into more marine science?
Yes, 100%. But it was tricky because as an international student, it's way too expensive, or it was, at least for
Right.
me, unaffordable to pay for those fees. So I
Hmm.
inquired with the university and they gave me the number and I said, thank you. I hung up the phone and I said, we're going to have to go a different route because I had no funding to back me up in this.
Right.
Um, yeah. And there's not much in terms of personal loans because I was an international as
Hmm.
well. Germany doesn't really do personal loans for university because university in Germany is free essentially. Um, so yeah,
Ah, gotcha.
yeah. So it was hard at the time to find out, and it was a tough decision to stick with it because I could have studied for free in Germany and could have gone back, but they don't. They at the
Hmm.
time they didn't have the right degree for me. They didn't have a marine biology degree as an undergraduate bachelor's degree,
Hmm.
and they had a master's degree. And like the kind of stuff I do now, I could have probably found something like it, but at the time I didn't know that that's what I wanted to get into. For example, ecology or conservation.
Right.
I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do in the end. And there was a
Hmm.
biology degree, but I wasn't on board with studying that like a full-time bachelor of
Hmm.
biology. I thought that sounded really much like learning a lot of physiology and anatomy and internal stuff of the animals, like a zoologist. um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I wasn't keen on that to do a 3 year degree of something that I kind of, but not quite wanted to do just to get to the master's. So in my stubborn mind, just found a different route, and it was good this way in the end, but it was hard.
So you spent what, about 5 years, 4 or 5 years before you saved up enough money to were you still able to pay the tuition? Like, did you still have to pay the tuition for an international student? Or did you get
No,
like permanent residency there, or a green
yeah,
card of some
I
sort?
spent the 5 years saving up money working full time, but also getting my residency. So I became a
Ah,
permanent resident. But then when you start university as a resident, as opposed to a citizen, you still pay domestic fees, but you have to pay them outright. You can't just waive them for a later date. Many people
gotcha.
can
Okay.
here, if you don't have the money up front, you can defer them until you can afford it later on. So that wasn't open to me. So I was
Okay.
saving up to be able to afford the fees outright that were domestic fees.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, and obviously not an easy thing to do. We're fast forwarding 5 years, but that's a hard 5 years of working and long hours and saving up money and also living there. It's not a cheap place to live, from what I hear. I've never been to Australia, but it's not. I heard it's quite expensive to live just in the first place. So, making sure you're okay, for short term, and then paying for your long term education. That's quite interesting. So, when you got to university, what university did you go for, and was it a marine biology degree? Is that what you were able to get?
Yeah, I was in Brisbane, Queensland at the time, which is in the tropics. And that's where I
Hmm.
started a Bachelor of Science with a major in marine biology. And we got to go on field
Hmm.
trips to the Great Barrier Reef. So, yeah, definitely. It was
Tough life.
amazing. Yeah. Yep. For an undergraduate person as well,
Now,
it
were
was
you?
very much like the US universities, like a whole campus experience, and I loved that.
Yeah,
That sort
yeah,
of those early
yeah.
years was amazing.
Well, it's a great university too.
Mm.
That you went to as well. There's a lot of like world renowned scientists there, especially that are working on the Great Barrier Reef as well.
Yeah.
Now, when you went to school, did you have a specific idea? I mean, you talked about liking ecology as you move through it, but did you have a specific idea of what type of animals or systems you wanted to study? I mean, now you're studying a marine mammal, quite an iconic marine mammal, but probably not what I would say would be what like people would normally set out to study right off the bat. So you mentioned coral reefs and so forth. Did you have an idea? Like, you're by the Great Barrier Reef. Were you like, okay, I'm going to be reef ecologist?
No, to be honest, I didn't. I was very flexible with what animal to study. I just knew I wanted to study an animal in the ocean. And I think I was a little bit scared and not wanting to channel a specific thing that I wasn't able to then do later on. It's really hard if you're too focused in on one species to find a project that has
Hmm.
that specific species. So I found for me it was easiest to be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit just go with whatever opportunities arise. I do have a favorite ocean animal. It's an octopus actually. I never wanted to
Okay.
study them myself, but I was always fascinated with them. Octopus and jellyfish are like my favorite animals of the ocean. I think they're super fascinating. That that's not
Yeah.
said that I was set on having to study them because in the ecological aspect, I'm more interested on the broader scale things that happen in the
Right.
ocean. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very similar to you. Mine is cuttlefish. So one of
Cool.
my bucket lists is to dive with the giant cuttlefish in southern Australia. So maybe
Nice. Tell me
one
when you're
day
here.
would be absolutely. Yeah, we'll go out
Yeah.
together. Maybe that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. I mean, it's a hard road to just even do undergraduate. And I assume, did you work throughout that time, like to just to
Yeah.
kind of make ends meet? So that's hard. Like
Yeah.
an undergraduate's like a job and a half, and then you're having to work as well on top of that to just sort of maintain living style and so forth. um so you're able to handle a lot when people throw it at you, which is great as a
Yes,
marine
I mean, it
biologist to be
helped.
able to.
The saving up beforehand really helped. So, and I do tell people now that it's not bad if you take a break beforehand to save up some money and be in a real job before you start university.
Right.
It's completely fine, and it really benefited me in terms of still having that job, but on a part-time basis, and sort of having a job maybe that
Hmm.
doesn't
Hmm.
require too much brain work as well, because you're already in it. You're just doing your
Right.
tasks and going home, and then the brain work happens when you're at uni learning new things.
And I think it makes, I don't know, I went to school with, I had a job in third year on campus, but I was very fortunate where I didn't have to necessarily work. But I feel like working and then going to school, like after when I went back to do my master's, I enjoyed it a lot more. I was much more into it. I don't think I took it for granted as much as I would, because you work so hard for it, to
Yeah.
get to where you want. Like you worked, 5, 6 years and continued to work throughout there just to get that undergraduate degree. You probably like valued it a lot more than somebody who just kind of came out and just had everything paid for them too, right?
Yes, I was always the most enthusiastic person there. And that was very evident in first year when you come across everyone that's just come out of high school and they're partying and they don't even know what an assignment is. And I was just there to do my job, which is learn and pass and do great. And I was really interested in the subject as well. So
Yeah.
it was really easy to engage because I loved it so much because I had worked hard to get there. Yeah.
And during that time, as you started to get closer to graduating for the undergraduate degree, you kind of mentioned that there were certain questions around ecology that you had. Now, did that come at near the end as you started to graduate and be like, you're starting to consider either working or going to graduate school? What kind of questions were coming your way, or what you were thinking of at that point?
Yeah, so what I noticed, and I always have been really interested in mathematics and statistics. I was definitely one of the students that would stick out and enjoy those biostats courses that everyone else
Hmm.
despised. I was, and it became evident to me that there was an angle where I could study something where I'm analyzing a lot of data and coming to conclusions
Hmm.
that relate back to the natural world. Because that was the other thing that I loved in high school. It was maths and English. And it was kind of coming together in my other
Right.
passion, that is the ocean. It just kind of, the courses kind of did that for me. The courses that I enjoyed the most were those quantitative ones, specifically. Yeah.
So you knew, you're like, I want to analyze something. I want to analyze specific animals, and this is what I'm going to do. Now you graduate. What's the next step at that point that you were thinking?
I was thinking I definitely wanted to be a researcher at that point. Yeah. I wanted to do something
Okay.
relating to research. And so the next step was definitely doing a master's, or here we call it an honors, which is a 1 year master's degree that is just a little
Right.
bit fast tracked for high performers. And because I knew I wanted to do a PhD essentially as well, I did a 1 year honors degree just to get me into that PhD. Once again, very goal oriented. I said I've
Okay.
wasted enough time with my 5 years of, delay. I'm ready. I want to do a PhD. I was very determined. So I
Yeah.
found an honors project here in Tasmania, and I was already studying elephant seals then, which then got extended to a
Okay.
PhD. Yeah.
That's amazing. So in your honors, you were studying elephant seals?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And how did that project come up? Was it just a professor at University of Queensland? Like that's when you decided, hey, like this is I'm interested in this, or did they kind of come to you and be like, these are the projects that I had,
A little bit of
and you
both.
chose one?
So I chose actually a professor that was a very statistics and mathematics person. So I chose the person that I wanted to
Okay.
analyze data with. And together we tried to source
Gotcha.
data to analyze. And so it just became sort of the people he knew, the people that I was interested in meeting as well, because there is a lot of departments here. So I'm now working with my
Right.
university, but also the Australian Antarctic Division, which is our federal government Antarctic presence that service the Antarctic stations.
Hmm.
So they're in charge of the elephant seal data that is has been collected down south that I'm working with.
That's amazing. Now you mentioned like you've been very focused throughout your university career, which I think is great. Do you think you would have been just as focused if you started, right after, like right as soon as you got to Australia instead of working those 5 years? Do you think you would have been as focused, or would you have been sort of the typical student just not really knowing what you want to do, or what you were going to do at that point?
I mean, at the very beginning of year one, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I said, it just kind of came
Mm,
throughout those 3 years of undergrad of what specific field I want to focus in on. But I think what I've
hmm.
mostly benefited from in working is some of those skills that I've gained in even just managing people because I was leading a team. A lot of the transferable skills that you get from working a full time job are so beneficial to me today in communicating science, in working in a team project, leading your own project as a student and coordinating multiple supervisors' times and getting the best out of it. Um, I think I benefited so much from doing that full time work that I'm still drawing on those skills today. I probably would have been just as focused in the degree though.
Awesome. Well, it's good to hear. It's consistent, right, throughout, that you're focused all the time, which I love. I know for me, working for a bit after doing my undergraduate and coming back to my master really made me focus. I was much more focused and ready because I had a specific plan of what I liked and what I didn't like. I thought it was interesting how you mentioned, you found a professor who was more analytical, not necessarily a professor who followed a specific species or habitat to study. You were just more interested in how to answer certain questions in terms of the
Yeah,
analytics, and then choosing the subject matter, which is interesting, especially like studying marine mammals. Usually it's somebody like, oh, I want to help understand marine mammals a little bit more by studying them. Here it's like, I want to answer ecological questions through data analytics, and
yeah,
here's my species that I'm just so happen to study. That's a really unique way of looking at things, and I think it's really cool because I think it allows you in the future to kind of have a bit more of an openness to study different types of species, perhaps using the same or similar or even different ways of doing ecological analytics and sort of analysis. I think that is a really interesting way of approaching science by asking those questions. It's getting really down to the researcher in you, to really look at that. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at things. And so for your masters, what was the study?
this was southern elephant seal survival and the influence of
Okay.
climate on female survival, broad scale climate specifically, because we have data dating back to the 1960s at Macquarie Island, where they've
Okay.
counted the population and they have individual identification of animals through time. So we have a really long data set there at this population. And in the past, everyone's been sort of suspecting that there is an influence of climate on their survival, but no one's been able to show that until I got my hands on it. So yeah, that's what did.
Wow.
Female
That's
survival
pretty
and
cool.
climate influences on female survival. Yeah.
And I mean, that's obviously useful. You're looking at an area in the Antarctic, like subantarctic. Climate change is having a huge effect in that area. Marine mammals are a bit of a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, when it comes to climate change. They're very much an indicator species, and you get to do your analytics while you did it. I think that's really cool. Now, 1 year is not a lot. Having a big database of data, which is really helpful, that's pretty cool. Did you feel a little bit overwhelmed when you get that much data as a master's student to go through?
I had some practice beforehand. So with the same supervisor, I did a
Nice.
small undergraduate 1 semester, and we did a similar analysis on a long-term data set of short-tailed shearwaters, which are one of those migratory birds that breed here in Tasmania, but they go all over the world on their
Okay.
migrations. Very similar
Hmm.
pattern. So like you said before, you can apply the same analysis to other species. This works for birds when
Hmm.
you have the ringed identifications of birds or the nest identification coming back to the exact same spot, just as much as for the seals that we have tagged with identification numbers. So I wasn't
Amazing.
too
Amazing.
overwhelmed. I also had a lot of support. My supervisors are great. That's why I'm still working with them. It was just a good team. So I curated
Yeah.
that. I specifically sought out the right people, because I didn't understand how people sign on to a project when they don't know who they're working with, just for the sole purpose of the project. I needed to know that I would get along
Hmm.
with the people as well as the project itself. So I made a big point to make sure that the
So
people that I approach are the ones I can work with.
now, was this sort of more of on your own volition, or was it something that somebody said, "Hey, make sure you have a good team to work with"? Because that's not something
Mm,
that every all graduate students know, right? Like that's a pretty
yeah,
unique
no
perspective. I
one
really
said
like
that
that.
to me. It was just not obvious, and no one explained to me how the postgraduate world worked. There was not much information out there. It
Hmm.
was just like you get a project, and then I would ask someone, be like, "How do you get a project?" "Oh, they're online or something." And then I'd be like, "But then you're just locked into those people." It just came naturally to me that I was like, because maybe
Right.
because of my work experience and working with people in
Yeah.
hospitality, where you get to
Yeah,
know a
for
lot of
sure.
people or you manage people, um, it was, yeah, it was already evident to me that I was going to need to meet those people that I'm going to be working with. But that came internally from my
Yeah.
own just asking questions of how that works.
I think that's great. That's such an important aspect because getting along and working well with your supervisor, your committee, the team that's around you, even the lab within the lab, I think is a big concern for a lot of people after. It's more of an afterthought, being like, oh, if I had gone back, I would have done the same thing as you just mentioned, Sophia. And so to do that right off the bat probably helped you a great, as you mentioned, just helped you a great deal in terms of really liking and continuing on with your PhD with the same supervisor to be able to answer maybe different questions, but and using different analytics, but for a longer term. So I think I'm boggled by that, very surprised, but I'm so happy that you did that because it
Me
makes your
too.
experience a lot better.
Mm.
So, doing a PhD, what made you decide to continue on to do a PhD after your master's? Because after your master's, you could probably get a job, or maybe as even as a research assistant within the same lab, and especially working on a species that's so unique. There's probably not a lot of people working on it. So, what made you decide to continue on to do a PhD? Was that just more of a personal thing, like a lifelong thing, or was this because, hey, I'm going to follow research? This is what I need in the future to maybe control my own research.
I think I just loved the research aspect, and I loved my master's so much that I was ready to just do 3 more years of that, 3.5 more years of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I
that's a lot. That's a good commitment. That's a good commitment.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I'm once again very goal oriented in terms of future prospects or getting the right
Mhm,
jobs in the future, because I've already worked hard and I've gotten a good full-time pay in my life. I don't want to go back to those base level salaries. I want to enter the market as a high level
mhm.
scientist, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I mean, doing a PhD is, before I mentioned undergrad is a full time and a half job. I feel like this is like equivalent of three full time jobs because you really get into it.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, you have a year's experience with elephant seals and doing this type of work. You're continuing with elephant seals, so why continue? And then what is the project on, and is it much different from your master's?
So why continue was a very simple. I enjoyed my master's, and there was many more questions to answer. So yeah,
Hmm.
it was a very simple decision because I was getting along so well with my team, and yeah, just continuing on was a no-brainer for me. And this project isn't much different. It's just expanding upon what I have already done and also taking the analysis to another level. And I'm spending a lot of time learning even more modeling skills. Even flew to Switzerland to learn a very specific aspect of the analysis that is being taught that is brand new, like a whole new branch of statistics. So yeah,
Wow.
I knew that I could fit that into this project and it would tailor to
Yeah.
the skills that I wanted to develop.
So was this like a specific course, like a for a week or something like that, or was it
Yeah,
like visiting a specific professor because they that lab or that professor knew it, or was it more of a company that has this specific statistic software or
it's
model?
a course and there is software that they're teaching during this course and there's a book as well and there's also a community associated with it.
Cool.
So you meet the people that can collaborate in the future too. But lots of different species there, from
Oh, that's awesome.
birds to bats to fish to elephant seals and
Yeah,
everyone analyzing
that's awesome.
populations. Yeah,
And they're all speaking the same language in terms of the mathematics and
yeah.
statistics, right? So that's what you
Instant
all bond
friends.
over. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, that's the best. That's the best part. I love that aspect. Great. And what's your project on for this for your PhD thesis?
Yeah, still wanting to look into climate influences on this population. Like I said, my master's
Hmm.
has shone a light on what's influencing the females of this population. So my first chapter was
Hmm.
kind of setting up the difference between males and females and their survival to make a point that there is a difference,
Hmm.
first of all. And then the next one that I'm working on publishing right now is specifically broad scale climate on male survival, and we've seen a difference in what's
Hmm.
influencing the females and the males. They go to different areas when they're adults as well to forage. So that was the next chapter. And then lastly, I'm trying to drill in on those external influences like climate a bit more locally, and trying to find out specifically what about the climate is it? Is it the food availability? Is it access to food?
Hmm.
Sometimes the sea ice is encroaching on their foraging area in specific times of the year, so there could be something more local going on. So kind of going in more smaller scale and trying to pick out the pieces in what does climate
Hmm.
even mean? Because to begin with, I was looking at
Yeah.
the very broad global indicators of climate, and now I want to find something more sort of localized to really explain what's going on.
Yeah, because you're looking at a population around that island, and then I'm sure, as you said, like there are global indicators, but then there are certain ways that climate change can affect that local area that may be unique to compared to other areas. So I think that's really interesting. Have you found those, like some of those, if you're allowed to mention those, some of those, local indicators?
Yeah, so in my paper from my master's for females and in the paper for the males that is currently looking at being produced, we found that the global indicators are the ones like the southern annular mode, which is the wind strength around Antarctica, and the wind strength and position, which drives the productivity into a certain area. So whether or not the winds are further
Gotcha.
north or south depends on where the currents are flowing and where maybe the primary productivity or the algae and the zooplankton are then driving the food that becomes available 1 year after this happens. That's another thing that I do
Hmm.
have to explain, because all of this
Yeah.
takes time. We have to
Yes, of
include time
course.
lags in this. But yeah, the winds are influencing what happens in terms of primary productivity in the ocean. And that's then driving food availability 1 year after, around the area where those animals live in Macquarie Island.
That's so
Very
cool.
interesting.
And
Yes.
it's so yeah, it's so interesting to see that. And you're 3.5, 4 years into it.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So you already have a lot of these models established, and you're writing up some of these analysis. Did it surprise you, some of them, like compared to what you first initially thought what would happen?
No, it didn't surprise me. My supervisors were already sort of on top of what is out there. They studied this species since the 90s yeah, even before then, late 80s. And they were physically there looking at what the seals are doing, tagging them, reciting them. and they have really good
Hmm.
experience with everything that I'm doing. So it was well informed in terms of what we selected to study.
Now let's talk a little bit about elephant seals in that area in general, because it's always interesting to find out about an animal that we don't really know much about. Can you kind of just give a brief synopsis of sort of their conservation status and where they like based in like around Tasmania, where they occur, what their life cycle is like, that kind of stuff.
Yep. So the population I study is at Macquarie Island. That's a subantarctic island. And this is
Hmm.
technically also managed by the Tasmanian parks. So the state government are also the Tasmanian state government is managing
Hmm.
Macquarie Island as part of our sort of our map of where they get to manage any national parks or marine protected areas.
Okay.
And so it is considered part of Tasmania, even though it's way further south. Um, but it's also separate because it is in the Southern Ocean. And so the
Right.
status of those seals that I study at Macquarie Island is super interesting because they have been declining for a long time at a very low rate, between sort
Mm.
of 5 to 2%, and are still declining um, at a
Hmm.
lower rate than they used to, but they continue to decline. And that's where we think the climate has something to do with it, or food availability in general has something to do with it. They used to be at a much higher level in the sort of late
Hmm.
1800s before they were harvested
Hmm.
commercially. And that's also a time when we used to have a local population of southern elephant seals in Tasmania, specifically on King Island,
Gotcha.
which is in the northwest of Tasmania, and sort of coming ashore anywhere around Tasmania. Um, but those
Hmm.
animals were hunted to extinction for their oil, just like whales were back in the day, and even penguins to a point where they ran out of animals to hunt.
And elephant seals are massive animals. Let's not get it twisted. They're a
Yeah, they've
big
got a lot of
animal.
blubber on
What
them.
are lot of blubber? Yeah. So can you just kind of give people an idea? I think a lot of people here in North America and around the world, we have an idea for seals and sea lions, and those can be pretty big. But how big can an elephant seal get typically?
Huge if we're talking the males. This is the largest. This is the largest pinniped or seal, I guess. So the
Okay.
males
Yeah.
can.
So
This
bigger
is
than a
all going to.
walrus.
Yes, yeah, yeah. The males are
Okay.
about five
Okay.
meters long and they can get to 3.5 tons. Huge. Yeah. The
Wow.
females, not so much. So this is also a species that has extreme sexual dimorphism, where we see a major difference between the adult females and males in terms of their size. So the females grow to maybe
Okay.
2.5 meters long, similar to just over what a human being would be long. Um,
Right. Yep.
yeah, and not quite as heavy because their job is every year to produce a pup. So that's where all their energy goes. And the male's job is to grow big and
Gotcha.
strong.
And they do. They definitely do. I mean,
Mm,
5 meters, you're looking at what, 15 feet, just over 15 feet, 3.5 tons. That's a big
yes,
animal.
we call them
And
beach
so, and they're,
master when they get
and
that big.
so,
Beach master, they're called the big ones. Yes, they are the beach master because they rule the beach. That's the term we use
that makes sense.
in the papers. Yeah.
That definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, after being hunted, is it what's the recovery like now? Is it harder to recover to get back to, I guess, close enough to historical numbers, or
Yeah,
is
we
there
have
something that's
nothing like the
always
historical
kind of
numbers at Macquarie Island. It's about a third of that, I think, from memory. Um,
okay?
Much less. Yeah, and they're sort of stabilizing but still declining at a much lower level. So there is, there's evidence there that there's
Okay.
potential for many more. There's evidence that there's potential for them to occur in Tasmania even. The northern counterpart of the species
Hmm.
goes a lot further south around California, where the northern elephant seals are. That is a lot warmer to
Hmm.
compare with, similar to where you'd see South Australia even in terms of the climate. So the potential is there for them to
Interesting. Okay.
expand, but the species has kind of come back in much lower numbers. And, that's something to study in and of itself, whether there's more potential for them to
Yeah.
expand further north. Is a very
Hmm.
interesting subject. And maybe we'll see more Neils in next years. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I mean, this is how this interview kind of came along. Was Neil the seal went, is a young elephant seal who kind of went viral on TikTok. There were numerous sort of creators that were sort of documenting his time in Tasmania, in this small village or town in Tasmania. And he was actually. Why don't you just kind of give us a little breakdown for those who are not familiar with Neil the Seal? I don't know how. If you're on TikTok, you have to know about Neil the Seal. But if they don't, can you just kind of give us a breakdown of what this elephant seal is doing, who he is, and sort of his interactions that we've seen on TikTok?
Yeah, I can do. Neil is a 3-year-old southern elephant seal. He was born on the Tasman Peninsula, which is on the southeast coast of Tasmania, and he was tagged back then, and so that's how we can identify him year on, year out. He's come back every single year since he was born in 2020. So he's now just over 3 years old because they're born around November. And
Okay.
he comes back to different areas of the sort of southeast coast of Tassie every single year. He's chosen some places in south of Hobart a few years, and now he's chosen Denali,
Hmm.
which is once again near the Tasman Peninsula. It's actually the little town that you have to pass through to get to the Tasman Peninsula. So that was interesting to me to see him
Okay.
return very close to where he was born. Yes, he comes ashore to
Yeah.
rest or to molt, depending on what time of year it is. So he does,
Okay.
yeah, his behavior is very classic for an elephant seal that spends a lot of time at sea foraging for food and then comes ashore to
Hmm.
rest during specific periods each year.
Okay. And it's interesting how he comes back to the same place. I'm sure there have been some studies, or maybe there should be some studies of why they continue to come back to places where they're familiar with, or they're born. I think that's quite interesting. Now, he seemed in the videos to be the only elephant seal in this area. Denali, was that the name of the town?
Denali,
Is that
yes.
Am I
Yeah.
right? Okay, Denali. So he comes ashore by himself. I would imagine that elephant seals are more in sort of groups, but he seemed by himself. Is that a regular behavior, a normal behavior?
So they would be in groups during the breeding season because they need to aggregate and meet each other to do
Right.
that. But he's not old enough to
Hmm.
be interested in breeding yet. So for that reason, his
Okay.
interest is just resting or molting. He doesn't necessarily need other seals around him for that. So it's
Okay.
nothing to be surprised that he will come back here because that is usually they do return to their natal beaches, which usually also is where they
Hmm.
breed. So yeah, he's a little bit unfortunate in that regard that
Okay.
he's doing that pattern where he's coming back, but that happens to be an area where there is no other seals.
I want to talk a little bit about what he looks like. A lot of the videos that I've seen, he seemed to be a little kind of like an off-white beige color. And he had some interesting markings along his body. And I don't know if they were scars from being out at sea, just as an animal would kind of get if they're interacting with something or scratching on a rock, or maybe another animal, as so forth. But he definitely had. I mean, he was beige. Is that like his fur? And I saw at one point. I don't know what video, if it was this year or another year or another part of the year, where he actually, like, I guess he was molting, and so a lot of that fur came off, and he just looked black underneath. Is that like a typical thing? So they'll molt that white beigey fur, and then be black underneath.
Yeah, 100%. So the molting skin looks a little bit browny beige when it comes off and dries,
Okay.
and then underneath is sort of that really fresh layer and smooth skin. So yeah, that's darker.
Yeah.
And also, if he goes into the water, then
Okay.
he'll look nice and sleek and gray as well.
Probably a little camouflage from some of that water too, right? I think,
Yeah,
is that the point?
yeah,
Okay. It's because it's got to be hard to camouflage such an enormous animal. 'Cause
yeah. I mean, at some
coming
point,
through the
he'll just
water.
be too big to hunt. Doesn't need that much camouflage. As a pup,
Yeah.
they do for sure. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, and
Mm.
and what's his size like this year? He's 3 years old. What was his size, like length and estimated weight?
He's probably the size of an adult female now, so around that 2 meter mark, 2.5
Okay.
meters. Mm.
2 meter mark.
Mm,
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Because he was pretty big. Yeah. He looked pretty. He looked pretty like a good size.
yeah.
And then he had a marking that I was always curious, and nobody seemed to talk about it. Or maybe I missed it. There seemed to be like a flat part on the top of his head, and I don't know if it was a sore or an area. Maybe there was a tag there of some sort. But is that a typical marking of an elephant seal, or is that was that unique to him?
He had a GPS tracker attached with glue on his head. So they look like little
Ah,
Teletubbies. They even have yeah, like an antenna sticking out. It's really
yeah.
cute if you look up the photos of him having that. So that is a
Okay.
GPS tracker, and it also tracks where he goes. If he goes diving underwater, it has a lot of the vertical migration
Yeah.
information of how their diving behavior and everything like
Nice.
that. So he was well studied for his location in time, and then also where he goes to forage and how he behaves at sea. So that was that specific tag
Okay.
on top of his head. It looks really funny. You should look up a photo. He looks derpy with it on.
Yeah, I definitely will. Maybe that'll be the cover of the image for this one. It
Yeah,
looks very
my
cool.
supervisor does a lot of
Now,
the tracking and tagging, and they use those specific tags on the elephant seals. And on top of the head
gotcha.
is the best location for them.
Neil is a very special elephant seal. It seems. He is not shy around people. In fact, sometimes some of the videos looks like he was kind of enjoyed some of the interaction and hearing the voices of the people in Denali. Can you just kind of talk about some of the antics he would get up to, or places he would visit that would really kind of provide that personality that we know and love about Neil?
Yeah, I mean the boat ramp that he came ashore on every single time was also really close to a main road, one of our main highways. So he was instantly interacting with people and traffic, and it was really hard to keep him off the road because it's a boat ramp and then a
Yeah, how
highway
do you tell a
essentially, which is one
2 ton?
lane. Yeah, he was blocking traffic, which affected the town. And so there's no way you're not getting popular if you're doing that, just sleeping on the road, and the trucks can't
Right.
get past to
Yeah.
deliver the food to the Tasman Peninsula. So, yeah, I think that's how he instantly won over the crowd. And people wanted to leave him alone, but still needed to get to work or do stuff. So he
Yeah.
chose the main road to sleep on. That's how he initially interacted with Tasmanians. And then he also kept going a little bit further and went into the people's backyards or front yards, I guess, in front that lived there and blocked people's cars, blocked people from getting out of their houses, smashing against their garage doors. Yeah, interacting with the urban landscape.
Well, and it seemed like the people looked like they had a good attitude around it. I'm sure he probably uh, tested the patience of a lot of a lot of people,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, it's quite interesting behavior from such a large wild animal to, I think I saw a story of preventing he laid in front of the driver's side of someone's truck. They couldn't get to work, so they had to call in and be like, Neil's in front of my door. I can't get to work right now. And there was a news thing on that.
Yeah.
What were, like, I guess, like, what was, obviously these, they're fun, lighthearted stories. Was the attitude of the people like that for the most part for him being around?
I think so, because this year it's been the third year that we've seen him in Tasmania. He's become,
Hmm.
global news now, but he's already been local news for 3 years straight. So people were very aware of what he was doing and how he was behaving. We had some issues with him a year ago where he had to be moved because he was at one of the most popular beaches in Hobart, and people were encroaching on his
Mm,
space a lot more, and people were letting their
yeah.
it was also a dog beach, so fair enough, but people were letting their dogs off leash near him, and it was just
Oh,
not a good time.
yeah.
So he had to be moved, which was a
Yeah. Yeah.
massive effort. And so the people that
Yeah.
interacted with him this time were definitely already aware of who the seal is and what he's doing, and so
Yeah.
maybe they were pleasantly surprised that they were chosen this time around.
There are, in the US, there are laws for marine mammals. You can't harass them. There's protections around that. In Canada, there's the same thing. in Australia, there are the similar rules for marine mammals and wildlife where, like, you're looking at a popular beach, but you don't want people to encroach, but people are people, and some people will want to touch or take pictures or try and take selfies and so forth. It could be danger to Neil, but also to them. He's going to defend himself if he thinks he's threatened. Are there rules and regulations and that laws around marine mammals?
Yeah, 100%. And so the state government sets the rules for that. And they were also really on top of specifically educating about Neil, but also when we have other seals, like leopard seals, sometimes come ashore, and they are also super
Hmm.
dangerous, especially for little
Right.
dogs and stuff. I mean, we haven't seen any bad interactions, but it's always about being present on the scene, educating people
Hmm.
about staying at least 20 meters away, keeping your dogs on lead even further away, and
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
photos with a long telephoto lens and not getting too close for that either, not crowding,
Hmm.
leaving the room towards the beach open if the seal wants to go back to the ocean, um, things like that. But
Hmm.
it's, yeah, people are really good at
Okay.
that here. We are used to a lot of wildlife in general. We have an active sort of
Yeah.
fauna around the place. Yeah.
An area. I can
Yeah.
imagine. Now, there was a couple of behaviors that I wanted to get sort of clarification on. The first is it seemed like there was a gentleman, it seemed like the same gentleman in a lot of these videos that seemed to kind of direct him to certain places if he wasn't supposed to be places, or be pretty far apart, but he looked very comfortable around Neil. I think he knew him in sorts. There was a man there, he had a vest on. Was he part of sort of the Tasmanian government, or even university, to sort of interact with him in a way to keep him out of harm's way, and maybe allow traffic to go through or somebody to go to work?
Yes, he's a worker for the Tasmanian state government marine conservation program, which handles specifically any
Hmm.
interactions with marine mammals and seabirds. And if any whale
Hmm.
strandings occur, they're on top of it. Anything that happens on Tasmanian
Right.
shores, they're on top of it. And yeah, he has done a lot of work with elephant seals and has worked with my supervisors down at Macquarie Island as well.
Ah,
So yeah,
okay.
he's very well
Awesome.
informed on how they behave, and I think if he's interacting with Neil, it's to keep Neil safe and off the road mainly.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like, because it was always at the edge of the road near the boat ramp, and it
Mm,
seemed like now there's a couple times like I saw Neil do this behavior, where he would almost like there would be people close. They still remained at a distance, or even this gentleman who was a little closer. It looked like he would prop himself, like stand up, almost stand up where his head was higher than what you would normally expect, and then
yeah.
open his mouth quite large, like quite wide. It was that a posturing move, being like, "Hey, I'm not afraid of you," or "Don't come any closer," in a more of a defensive kind of way, because maybe there were just too many people around, or somebody was getting a little too close, and that's just him saying, "Hey, here's a warning. Stay back. We can chill out, but just stay back." Is that what that is, or is that a completely? Did I misread that behavior all in all?
No, I think you're right. And also, they can sort of practice playing by smashing their bodies together like that too. If it was two seals, two juveniles practicing how males
Gotcha.
interact in the future would be one seal doing that and the other one doing that and kind of smashing their bellies together. So I think it was in
Okay.
some way a behavior that was either defensive or initiating some kind of interaction, probably something you don't want to be doing with the seal kind of interaction.
I would imagine smacking bellies with a seal would not go your way. I assume.
Yeah, yeah.
With a
The males,
2-ton
yeah. Not if
animal.
they're
Yeah.
practicing how to win over a beach full of females.
Yes. That would be very interesting. Okay, cool. And now the other very popular behavior that you would see, it seemed like Neil had an obsession with pylons or cones, if you will, whether they be orange or whether they be even like a sign of some sort. There's an account called Neil the Seal, and he'd put up signs, and Neil would just kind of like flatten the signs at times, it seems, and he'd be like, "Hey Neil, you flattened my sign, I'm trying to protect you," and say stay away from people and stuff. But the cones, like the pylons, were especially like it seemed like he was rubbing up against it, maybe to itch it. I know seals and sea lions love to do that. Was that kind of behavior? He just loved cones to kind of play around with.
I think it was part social behavior once again. Like the juveniles do practice some play as well, and he doesn't have
Hmm.
any juveniles to do that with. So it could be purely playful and sort of practicing those movements they would be doing, like I've just described as well, smacking against
Hmm.
something to be able to in the future learn how to fight. But I think
Right. Right.
also, yeah, it could be itching if he's molting and wanting to get some skin off. Um,
Ah.
Yes, it could be both things. And someone has suggested to me, and I'm not sure if this is true, but someone's also suggested that the cones and the color, the bright orange color, could be reminding him of some bioluminescent animal. So he feels drawn to it because of what he sees underwater. But I'm
Oh.
not entirely sure if that's true or
Okay.
if it's just whatever happened to be in the area where
Right.
he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he seemed very curious about them, regardless of what it is. Like he seemed very. At one point, it looked. There's one video where he's got his flipper on it, and he's like moving it down on the ground and like flat, like on its side, and then bringing it back up, and then down on the
Yeah.
side. So obviously, a very curious animal, very bright, and seems to be wanting to be stimulated by something. Like very curious, a curious mind, and trying to play around and stuff. It was very interesting. Now, obviously with an animal like that, it's large, it can be aggressive, it has to be. um do people around the area of Denali, do they pretty much respect the space that's needed, and just like to have him around as like sort of an iconic figure, and just kind of the way the videos were, it's like they were just like, Neil, you got to get out of here, like it's time to go, like you're in my yard or something. They almost like talk to him like a child of the neighborhood, so to speak. And so was that sort of the tended to be sort of the outlook for him, sort of the way they spoke to him, like in a very nice way, like he's just part of the town, and they're happy to have him there.
Yes, as far as I've seen, yes. And it's been really pleasant to see people react in that way and not
Hmm.
be, offended by a seal not letting them go to work. So, as far as I've seen, it's been really good community down there and in previous years too. So, yeah.
And so when does he normally like in the last few years, when does he normally arrive? And now my understanding is he's decided to go back out into the ocean again. So
Yeah.
how long was this time? Has it changed? Is it always around the same time? What's the time frame?
So the molting happens around November, December time, which is our summer. That's what he was doing this year.
Okay.
And so he would definitely be expected to come back around that time again in the next 12 months. There's also a behavior that the
Okay.
juveniles are doing where they come ashore to rest in the middle of the year, June, July time. They do what we call a mid-year haul
Okay.
out. They don't molt at that time, they just come ashore to sleep and rest. He has done that here before. He's done that 1 year when he was a pup, and then another year after that. So it's possible that he's coming back once again in
Okay.
our winter, which is June and July, just to
Yeah.
rest. He's less active than he's literally just sleeping.
Right. Yeah, just more of resting. He's been out for a while, and he's more resting. That's
Yeah,
interesting. I imagine that people are missing him now though, now that he's
yeah, I
gone.
bet. Yeah, I agree. Sad.
I saw one that Neil the Seal account has, they had like a little stuffed animal of Neil, and maybe some like little small
Yeah, some
pylons, like they're
local
like miniature.
producers have
Oh,
made some artwork. Yeah, it's really cute. So they are very attached to him, and it's nice to see. We had to make sure that he doesn't get too used to people. So I'm happy to hear that he's back out at
of
sea,
course.
and not
Yeah.
going out of the norm of what a seal like that would do, because that would cause major problems if he's going to start getting fed or something like that. No,
Of
we
course.
don't want that. We want him to
Yeah.
have a natural wild life out there. And if we get to see him, that's a privilege for us.
When you look at it from a human perspective, to have sort of this icon like Neil the Seal, whether he comes back or not, but to have the videos, to have the documentation, to have sort of the art pieces, do you think that like that's from a conservation standpoint, that's got to be a pretty good thing, because people will take pride in elephant seals, so they might be more willing to act not only from a behavior standpoint, but to protect them or support maybe groups or research, for elephant seals just in general. Do you find there's that type of attitude now?
Yeah, 100%. And Tasmanians in general are very proud of their nature and wildlife. So they are very aware of what a beautiful spot in the world this is. And so any
Mhm.
angle towards that will have a conservation benefit. And I can now say when people ask me what I study, oh, do you know Neil the seal? Oh, that's the animal I study. Yes, people know. Yeah, and they love it.
I love it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Must be easy to identify now. So that's I
Mhm.
love that. That's fantastic. Now, I know you're getting towards the end of your PhD. You probably have a lot more questions to answer. Will you be pursuing, like, maybe I know it's still early to tell, but in your frame of mind, I know how motivated you are. Are you thinking postdoc maybe with elephant seals, or maybe answer a different question about a different species? Are you thinking of taking a little bit of a break, or going maybe for professorships right away? Like, what's the thought process as of now? And we're not going to hold you to it. We're just wondering where your thought process is.
Okay. Once again, very open-minded. So I would be open to doing a postdoc because I'm still really enjoying the research. The PhD hasn't broken me at this point.
Right.
So yes, I would be open to doing a postdoc. I also surprised myself in enjoying the teaching a lot when I do some tutoring and stuff. So I
Oh,
would be
okay.
open to doing
Yep.
some academic work in that regard, which I never expected. Uh,
Yeah.
but because I'm teaching
Right.
the
Right.
subjects that I really enjoy, like those quantitative ones, it's been
Hmm.
super fun for me. So I would be
Yeah.
open to that sort of career path too if one opens itself
Yeah.
up. I do a lot of work with marine
Oh,
mammals
good.
in general. So I'm part of the Society for Marine
Hmm.
Mammalogy. We'll be having a conference in Perth at the end of this year where I'll be involved as a student member and a general communications member as well. So doing a lot of networking, finding
Nice.
out more in the marine mammal space. And I also work a lot in the Southern
Yeah.
Ocean community. So polar science is a really big thing here. And I've been to New Zealand where we've had
Yeah.
conferences specific to Antarctic science too. So there's a lot of different options right now. And I'm just going to see what opens up
Yep.
and jump on it if I like it.
I love it. I love that idea. I mean, you obviously have a very big passion for what the work that you do. I can see you teaching that biostatistics course you mentioned at the beginning,
I love it so
whether it
much.
be in Germany and Australia, whoever. Yeah, I could see that. That was my favorite course in university, was biostatistics.
Nice. I
That's where
don't
I
meet
really
many people
started
that say
to
that.
things started to click.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone
Yeah, it
hates
really
it.
is where things started to click for me.
Yeah,
Oh, I
cool.
know. I know. People did not like it. I think the attitude of the professor who teaches it really helped me. We
Yeah.
had two professors who taught it. One who was more of a biologist researcher, the other one was more of a statistics professor. And having that combination to see both sides, I thought was really interesting. But the attitudes, their passion for putting on sort of like real world projects, and having to go through that really helps. So I can see you benefiting a lot of students, and maybe inspiring a lot of them to follow that quantitative path, if
Oh,
you
thank you.
taught biostatistics. So that would be my vision for you. I think that would be really cool to see you teach that one day. But you know what? Whatever you get into, I know it's going to be successful, because I see the motivation, I see the passion, and I love it. And to be honest, I would love to have you back on, Sophia, to talk more about the work that you're going to be doing in the future, and just kind of inform people maybe about elephant seals, maybe a different type of marine mammal, or different type of ecological question that's been racking around in your brain, and love to have you back to talk more about it.
Love it. Thanks, Andrew.
You bet. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait for people to get to listen to this episode. They're going to love it. And I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sophia, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on to talk about your career and talk about elephant seals, as well as Neil the seal. Such a character, such an interesting species. And I love how we can see these iconic species and these iconic individual species and individuals of those species, and be able to learn about them, learn about that they have character. One thing that I was able to do, I was very proud of this, as I was able to host a podcast for the Toronto Zoo. And during that time, we interviewed a lot of zookeepers, and each zookeeper had a story of the characters of the individual animals. They were all unique. They all had very, very different traits, very different. Some were, more aggressive or playful or had, very different personalities, more outgoing, and some were more reserved. It just depended on the individual of that species. Very interesting stories. There's gorillas that would try on hats, and there'd be other gorillas that were afraid of toads and frogs. And it's just interesting to see how each of them react to, stimuli around them. And Neil the seal is no different. He was an animal, or he is an animal that loves to be around people, that is not afraid to be around people. He knows that they're not going to hurt him, and that's a true testament to the people around him that are not touching him, they're not going after him. There's great enforcement around that. There's great monitoring around that, and I think that is something that is needed. And then having the pride of having Neil the seal. Having the pride of saying, hey, you know what, we're proud of having this elephant seal come to our village, our town over the last 3 years. And we hope that he comes back again, almost like a tourist attraction during that time. And I just love it. I just think it's really interesting. It allows people to get to know animals, especially a 2-ton animal right now. He's going to be 3 tons. He's going to be huge eventually. Not that he isn't now, but he's going to be even bigger. And I think that's something that, people get to see, and they get to understand this animal and how he just likes to play with pylons and lie in the middle of the street and disrupt things. It's just really interesting. So I highly recommend that you go over to TikTok, if you're on TikTok, and watch these videos of Neil the seal. You'll get a kick out of it. I highly recommend it. And I just think it's really interesting. By the way, if you want to find out more news about, things like Neil the seal or stories like animals and conservation and so forth, I do have a newsletter that I put out 5 days a week. All you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. That's speakupforblue.com/newsletter. It'll take you to a sign up. You just put in your email, and it'll get sent to your inbox every single weekday. And you'll be able to find, news articles. We'll put out summaries for our episodes that we've put out. You'll actually be able to listen to the episodes right in the newsletter, as well as finding out jobs. So if you're looking for jobs, you can find out that as well. So go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. And that's it for today's episode here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.